Yes? How many of you like it cold? Oh, wow. You're my people. Summer people are not my people. I have too much insulation for that. Okay, so there's a lot going on right now. Marching band is Saturday. Anything else you want to announce going on? Yeah. Oh yeah, brass ensembles tonight. Sorry. I knew I was forgetting some tonight. Yeah. Percussion ensemble is Friday at 5. See, Sunday. I knew all this in my head and I forgot to say it. Okay. Anything going on next week you want to announce? Yeah. Didn't want to announce your own concert, Jacob? You gotta have, you have your people, your PR people are doing it for you. Okay, so Jacob's, what time is that, Jacob? 7 o'clock, Watauga, downtown. If you haven't been there, it's a cool place. Don't go on the roof deck if it's 24 degrees. Next Saturday, just put this on your radar, November 11th, is Johnson City Symphony Orchestra right next door in the Grand Hall. And it's a good idea for you to start working on those orchestra concert as well. It's free. Johnson City Symphony and Symphony of the Mountains are both free both times. There's a lot of faculty that are playing in both of those as well. One little weird note to talk to you about the student workroom. So we get a lot of complaints, not a lot, but several of you complain about the smell in the student workroom, which is, don't leave food in there. If you spill something on the carpet, please wipe it up. Carpet holds smells. The other thing is, to get that student workroom, we had to really bargain with the university because space is a premium on the university, and it could be a classroom. So if you want to keep that, we got to take care of it. And so we got a report from the custodian that somebody was kicking buckets. I don't know. I don't want to know. I just ask that you think smart about what you're doing in there. And the custodian noticed because when they were walking by, the bucket hit the window. So we have security cameras, but Jenny and I don't really want to sit there and look at all the security footage to figure out who it was. So let's just not do it again. And if you see somebody else doing something stupid in the workroom, please, feel free, empowered to tell them to stop and let us know. Because that room, we could lose that room if we don't take care of it, because the university wants classrooms real bad. So please make sure that you're being good stewards on that. Okay, today we have a dual presentation, so I'm going to stop talking because we have two people. These are both incredible alumni of our very own program right here to talk about a very important topic, which is on the screen behind me. So please welcome to the stage Cassidy Lester and Poff.
Okay, I'm going to bring this a little closer to me. Hi, everybody. So both Cassidy and I are alumni of ETSU, and today we want to make this more like fun and kind of like interactive. So if you do have something to say, just kind of raise your hand and be like, hey, or if you have an idea or a question, just let us know. And also, disclaimer, neither of us are professional speakers, so we're just trying to do our best today, so don't give us a hard time. Please. Okay, so my name is Poff, and I currently work as Director of Operations with Symphony of the Mountains in Kingsport. I actually plan to teach middle school right out of college, and as we see, that didn't happen. But I was given this job opportunity, and I was like, I'll give something different a shot. So now I'm trying this out. My role with the symphony is basically logistics, moving equipment, all the background work that no one really knows happens to make things happen. Moving on from that, I do enjoy the challenge of this job, but I miss teaching, of course. I have a few students who are beginners in the Johnson City area, and I enjoy working with them. My information on like how to get in contact with me is at the end of this, so if you do have a question like, hey, what's it like doing this job, you can definitely come ask me that. Some of you may know me already, but if you don't, like I said earlier, I'm an ETSU alum, so it's easy to get in touch with me. I graduated ETSU with a Bachelor of Music in 2022, and a Master of Arts in Teaching in 2023. So I'm going to start back in the 5th grade for my information. I'm going to use my handy-dandy notes for that. So in 5th grade, when I picked out my instrument, that was pretty funny because my band director was like, you get scholarships for trombone. So my parents were like, well, you should definitely play the trombone. They were all for it, of course, at that point. And they actually found me an instrument in the newspaper. So it was a posting in the newspaper. And we went to somewhere in Tennessee, I can't remember where, and we actually found my trombone, bought it, and I still have it to this day. After that, I continued playing, and whenever I started marching band, there were all males in the section, of course, and they definitely made a lot of jokes towards me about just random things that only applied to females, and it bothered me. So after my first day of band camp, I literally came home, I was crying to my mom, and I was like, I don't want to do this because it definitely bothered me. But my mom was like, just give it a shot, it's okay. And those guys graduated within 2 years. And then after that, moved on to high school band. And by the time I graduated school, we had a full section of female trombonists. So I was pretty proud of that, and that made me happy to leave it in that shape. And then after that, went to college, ETSU, all that. I would say the next big moment for me was ITF 2022. And there might be a few people in here who went, I can't remember. But when we went to ITF, I got to meet a bunch of trombonists who had been mentioned when I did surveying for my research project. So that was pretty cool to meet them in person. And one of them actually was like, I've seen your research. And I was like, oh my gosh. So after that, I did feel noticed. And I was like, this is actually making an impact. So after that, that was when I started with the symphony. And to this day, my thesis paper has 496 downloads from all over the place, which is kind of crazy. And I'm still very proud of that. The way that I stay connected to my research is through, believe it or not, there's a Facebook group chat that I'm in. And it is female, non-binary brass players. And it's a group on Facebook. Anybody, if you're in any of those categories, you can fit into the group. And I would highly suggest it. You can get feedback, you can ask questions, literally anything in this group. And I would say that's a huge deal for me because I like staying connected with my research in a way that is easy. I don't have to go on the internet searching things. So I would highly suggest finding a group like that to stay connected in your field. And now I'll throw it over to Cassidy.
All right, thank you, Em. So I know a lot of you through just teaching, but some of you I don't, but I think I've seen faces in marching band and some other places. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Cassidy Lester. I married Michael Lester. We are the ETSU Music Department love story. I am the assistant percussion director and the director of jazz bands at Elizabethton High School. I'm an adjunct teaching intro to music at Northeast State Community College, and I also work with the Marching Bucks, primarily with front ensemble, but sometimes I like to see the battery too. M started in 5th grade, but in Blountville, Tennessee, we start band in 6th grade. Right, Logan? Yeah. And so I started band in 6th grade. When we were choosing instruments, I had a really difficult choice. I couldn't decide between horn or percussion. So I didn't actually choose, my band director did. I said, here, these are my options, please choose for me. I can't make decisions for myself. And so we see what he chose today. So I'm very happy being a percussionist. So I went to Blountville Middle School and then to Sullivan Central High School. Rest in peace. They're now, for those of you who don't know, they combined to make Westridge. So that my high school is actually a middle school now. But throughout high school, we usually had, if we had 20 people in the percussion section, we usually had 4 to 6 who were females. And so I wasn't always alone. But one of the cool things that we did is on Friday nights after football games, before a competition, we would have female like drumline sleepovers. And so that was just a unique thing that we did to kind of stay connected as girls, while the boys did their own weird stuff. But so when I came to college, I expected that to be similar. I expected there to be a few more girls, but when I started as a freshman, I was the only female major. There were a couple that did percussion ensemble the first semester, but then they stopped doing that the second semester, and so I was completely alone. We know when I started, Dr. Ball was here, and also Dr. Sanderbeck, and so I had two male professors. And then when I was a sophomore, we had, some of you might remember Leilani. She came in when I was a sophomore, and so she was there with me for the rest of my time, but it was very limited. And so I started realizing that in the field of percussion, females are rare and kind of unique. And so I was in the honors program, the Fine and Performing Arts program, and so in order to graduate, we had to write a thesis, both of us. And so mine stemmed from my perspective of being one of the only females, and I wanted to explore that. So in 2020, I published my thesis titled, Whence Comes the Lady Percussionist? The Changing Roles of Females in Professional Percussion Positions from 2011 to 2020. As of about 12 p.m. last night, my thesis has 824 downloads from the ETSU Digital Commons, and it's also regularly downloaded from academia.edu. So I had a similar experience to M, where I've presented at a few conferences, and I've had people reach out and say, hey, I saw that you're going to be at that conference. I used your research on a presentation that I did a month ago. And so that's really, really cool to see that our research is actually making an impact in the world, and people are seeing what the work that we put in to find some of this information. So I graduated in the spring of 2020 with a bachelor's in music performance. And then I saw my picture flash across the screen for graduation, because that was also when everything got shut down for COVID. And so my life took a little bit of a turn. I ended up moving to Texas for a year and starting a master's program online. And so then in 2022, I graduated again from ETSU, but with a master's in business administration. So just to give you a little bit of background from my education here. And so since graduating, I've had the privilege of being able to present my research at a few different places. The first being the National Conference on Percussion Pedagogy in 2022. And then again in April of this year at TMEA. This past May, Michael and I also got to premiere a new piece that was written by a female percussionist at the National Conference on Percussion Pedagogy. And then in addition to these fun little things, I'm also in the middle of a 3-year term serving as the secretary for the Percussive Arts Society Tennessee chapter, where Dr. Geiger is the president. So that's a little bit about me. And now we're gonna get into the fun stuff.
Yay. So just something to add on the end of what Cassidy was saying. She was talking about a lot of the opportunities she's been given kind of leading from her research. I would highly suggest, even if you weren't required to do a research project, like a full project or paper, I would highly suggest just doing some research on your own. Just look up on even ETSU's database or other databases online and just search interesting topics and see what you can find out there, because it is interesting. Okay. The terminology, so we just wanted to give a quick terminology rundown because this applies to both of our projects. So for our project, gender bias is favoritism towards or prejudice against a particular gender. And another important term for our research was female identifying and male identifying. For the purposes of our research, we both asked just what people identify as. So it doesn't matter what sex they were assigned at birth in our research's purposes. And then last but not least, non-binary, and most of you probably know what that means. Non-binary and genderqueer are umbrella terms for gender identities that are not solely male or female. I only had one response that was someone who was non-binary, and then Cassidy, did you have any to yours?
I did. I had a few.
You had a few? Oh, excuse me. But we didn't have many non-binary responses. Hopefully in future research, I think it would be interesting to find specifically non-binary people and see how their experiences are in the music world. And now Cassidy.
Okay, so as I mentioned, my thesis, the title is right there, it's really long, so I'm not going to repeat that, but this research stemmed from just my experience, and I wanted to find out if that was normal for a lot of people. So I found a dissertation written by Dr. Megan Obb, and it was published in 2010, and so this research was documenting the changing roles of females in a professional position throughout the United States from 1930 to 2010. So her time span was quite a bit larger than mine, but she looked at the number of females playing in the top US orchestras, teaching at the collegiate level, studying in college, so students like you, and then being recognized by our leading percussion organization, which is the Percussive Arts Society. And so that was, her study looked at those metrics, and so I mirrored hers 10 years later to see if anything had changed since 2010. So to do my research, I used the League of American Orchestras directory, the College Music Society directory, and the Percussive Arts Society website. Basically, what I found was that in the top two-tier orchestras, which is based off of their budget, operating budget, the biggest orchestras, I found that 95% of the percussionists were male, which means only 5% are female. In collegiate settings, the percussion faculty, only 92%, or only 8% were females, so 92% were males. And then the people that we look up to as role models and like just the outstanding percussionist, 95% of them being inducted into the Hall of Fame are also male. And so based on her research, the numbers really hadn't changed. The percentage of women working in the top orchestras and also as college faculty has remained the same for about 50 years. Only about 25% of percussion faculty that were female were even full-time. So 75% of the 8% that are teaching in college are adjunct or part-time. They don't even have a full-time gig. Similarly, with the Hall of Fame, there have been a few more women in the last 3 to 4 years that have been inducted, but for about every female, there's 3 males. And so the numbers aren't really changing too much, even though we are trying to kind of mitigate that and recognize other genders. And so that brings me to why are percussion and brass fields male-dominated? And so this brings us to gender bias, which is another term that we used throughout our research. So according to Beth McLeod, in her book titled Women Performing Music, The Emergence of Women as Classical Instrumentalists and Conductors, only certain musical instruments were acceptable for women to perform in the early 1900s. Women were discouraged from playing brass or percussion instruments because these instruments would distort faces and posture, which they being men, deemed unattractive. And so percussion instruments especially were seen as aggressive, physical, and just unladylike. A major contribution of this bias came from marching band directors, as they continued recruiting boys because they just wanted an all-boy band, which stemmed from the military, but that's another thing. And so the girls were really only allowed to play keyboard instruments like the bell kit.
I'll mention something here before we go on. Mm-hmm. And this is on another slide. We have some quotes put up from just various people about instruments and gender. And something here that I thought was interesting, Cassidy mentioned like being unattractive to play a certain instrument. And there's a quote in here that I think it's like exactly from my research. And it's about a girl who said when she was choosing her instrument, her mom told her she couldn't play tuba because only fat and ugly girls played tuba. So that's real. That is fully real.
Okay, so part of gender bias, one of the consequences is it leads to the gender stereotyping of instruments. And what that means is that basically if we see the majority of people playing a flute and they're female, then we're going to associate a flute as being a feminine instrument. Likewise with tuba, if we see only males playing the tuba, then it's going to become a masculine instrument based on our perception. And so research indicates that it's not only females who suffer from gender stereotyping applied to the suitability of the instrument. It typically just occurs unconsciously at this point. One might automatically associate an instrument such as drum or tuba with males, but xylophone and flute with females without much thought. And what happens is because we associate that with like a girl playing a flute, then girls are more likely to play that flute because they see it as being feminine, which is just reinforcing the stereotype. And we end up with the majority of players being flute, or being females. Likewise with percussion, we end up with the majority being males, just because that stereotype is getting reinforced. Parents see that there are more males playing this instrument, so they're like, yeah, my son can play this, but he can't play the flute, or she can't play the drums because her friends aren't playing the drums. Unfortunately, even young children are susceptible to these stereotypes when they're choosing instruments to study. One of the first major studies of gender stereotyping of instruments was designed by Harold Abels and Susan Porter in 1978 in a study titled The Sex Stereotyping of Musical Instruments. And basically, they conducted 4 studies. The first one was adults had to choose instruments that they would encourage their children to actually pursue. These instruments included cello, clarinet, drum, flute, saxophone, trombone, trumpet, and violin. And so the results of these studies showed that adults were far less likely to encourage a female child to play drums than a male child. And so it starts with the adults. Children don't know what they don't know. The second study discovered that college students, about half of them were music majors, viewed the drums as more masculine while the flute was considered most feminine. And so everything that we've been saying, it stems from research. We're not just making this up based on what we observe. The third study showed that from kindergarten to 5th grade, boys maintained a stable preference for stereotypically masculine instruments, but girls chose a wider variety. However, and so that was kindergarten to 5th grade. However, as girls aged, their preferences moved toward the stereotypical feminine instruments. And we'll see that in some recent research that we conducted. And finally, the fourth study examined the presentation of instruments to preschool children and noticed that gender stereotyping of instruments may dissipate if children are initially presented to the instruments in a neutral setting. So if a student hasn't seen that all of the girls are playing flute and all of the boys are playing drums, if they haven't seen that yet, then they're just going to see an instrument and they're going to say, oh, I like that, and I could play that. And so while we can see the effects of stereotyping between instrument families, we can also see these effects in like different percussion sections. Keyboard instruments are typically seen as more feminine, and battery instruments are typically seen as more masculine, even though we here have both. Yeah. One more thing on that slide. Can you go back? And just so that you can kind of see the slide, these are the instruments that were used in the study and which ones were traditionally considered feminine or masculine. Okay. So in 2016, there was another study, so this was much more recent than 1978. And this study was titled Gender and Musical Instrument Stereotypes in Middle School Children. Have the trends changed? And so as we can kind of see in the charts, the first one is the frequency of instrument gender categorization across the middle school band. So how are the students categorizing these instruments? We can see that the black on the top chart is a girl instrument. So flute, everybody voted that flute was a girl instrument. Oboe, a girl instrument. Bassoon, it was kind of mixed. Clarinet, girl instrument. Saxophone, one of the mixed ones. Trumpet, male instrument primarily. Horn, mixed. But we go to trombone, it's a boy instrument. Euphonium, boy instrument. Tuba, boy instrument, and percussion, boy. And so these are middle school students who think this. And there were significant changes in the instrument gender assignment as a function of greater band experience. So if we look at the second chart, now we're looking at beginner band students are the white. Gray is the concert band or the 7th grade. And then symphonic band is like the 8th grade. Trombone, trumpet, and horn are increasingly categorized as boy instruments with increased band experience. So that kind of goes along with what I mentioned earlier. As the students are getting older, they're categorizing them more one way versus the other. There are also significant differences in instrument gender categorization as a function of the child's gender. So girls were more likely than boys to view trombone and horn as girl instruments, while both boys and girls were likely to assign the saxophone to whatever their gender was. So a female would say, yeah, the saxophone is a female instrument, and a boy would say the saxophone's a male instrument. And so we will, in a few minutes, we will look at some recent studies that we did in our area, just to kind of put some of this to home. And I know that this is a lot of like graphs and stats, but we'll get through this a little bit quicker and then move on to what we can do to change things. So M's research.
Okay, for my research, I've got to try to get this adjusted here. I'm taking it off. So for my research, unlike Cassidy, she kind of found one that gave her, I think, that inspiration and that idea to go off of. For me, I couldn't find anything based on female trombonists that I wanted to imitate, really. So for me, I wanted to ask college students, like female trombonists, hey, what's up? Is your gender affecting opportunities you're getting? Blah, blah, blah. But I couldn't find that out there. So my female trombonist experience of gender bias, my study ended up being based off of female college trombonists and professors. So I sent it out to all professors in the U.S. For them, it didn't matter, male identifying, female, non-binary, whatever. The professors, I just asked them basically, what are you doing for your students to make sure that everyone has the same opportunities? And then for the students, it was asking them about their experiences in their studio. And then I'll try to go to the next slide. There we go. Okay, for mine, I wanted to start with a little bit of history, things that I found interesting. Normally, I think history is very boring. I mean, it's important, but normally it just bores me. So this is something I even found interesting. Before 1970, blind auditions were not a thing. So if you were auditioning for an orchestra, you would probably just be in front of the manager and the music director doing your audition and then leaving. And with this, we mostly had at that time male orchestras, fully male. As you can see in this picture, it was Chicago Symphony Orchestra's brass section, and every single person in this is a white male, actually, I believe. But anyways, and this caused a lot of discrimination as well because, you know, if your best friend comes in and does an audition, hey, you can hire them. So this didn't make the most equitable experience for all musicians. Then during the 1970s, this changed. Blind auditions were introduced. A lot of orchestras adopted this, and Symphony of the Mountains in Kingsport, we do blind auditions to this day. So most people still use these. And after that, we saw that 30% more female musicians were hired. Maybe there were more female musicians as well, so maybe that was a factor. And then also 25% more female musicians were in orchestras in general. So this photo here was a more recent photo of the Chicago Symphony's brass section. And there's still not many females, but in horn world, you can see there are 2 female horn players. So that's something. And then the important findings from my research that I wanted to mention, there was a lot of information, but I found it interesting that majority of the students that I surveyed only had 3 or less female role models. So there were female trombonists with barely any role models that were very similar to them. And then it was also interesting to me that only 30% of professors mentioned measures in place to help maintain equal opportunities for their studio. So this could be holding bond auditions, this could be sending out an email to all the students about an upcoming event. Anything that they do to make sure that everyone is getting those same chances and opportunities. So as you can see on this chart here, 47% said, they told me in the survey, yes, we have measures in place, but only 30% actually told me we hold blind auditions or we do the things to make sure students are being treated equally. And this was something, when I worked on this, Dr. Dedman and I both were like, this is crazy. We're like, why aren't people mentioning what they're doing? They're just wanting us to think they're treating their students equal. So they're saying yes. But for you all, if you're a future educator, or even if you're just gonna have colleagues who are musicians, you have to do the things, right? You can't just say, yeah, equality. You have to actually do things, okay? Sorry. Okay, this is our slide I mentioned earlier. And we want to have a few people read some of our quotes up here. So if someone wants to start up in the top left. Anybody, yell it out. I actually wanted to play the tuba, but she said only that or other girls could play it and please. This was the one I mentioned earlier, and this is true. Someone's parent told them this. Next, let's go down. We'll go to the bold one. Let's go down to how does a girl? How does a girl as little as you carry around, much less play an instrument of that size? And the next one, you play well for a girl. That one's a very broad one. You play well for a girl. Next. I'd rather play with you anyway. You're better to look at. I've had that said to me a couple times. That's for me, yeah. We can't murder. No. I didn't know girls could play like this. A couple more, yeah. Always being seen as weak, shy, innocent has affected the language some of my teachers have used when approaching my playing. This was one I saw in my research, and I don't know if you did too. My mom said only boys play brass instruments. Sorry, guys. Stutters suck. Play more like a woman. Hey. So these are serious things that people have said, and sometimes I'm just like, really? Like, really? And I still remember looking at my research that I got back, because people would give me quotes, direct quotes, and I'm just like, really? Like, how is this real? I will bet every penny in my bank account that every single one of these quotes is said by a parent who is over the age of like 46. See, and most of my responses, it was, professors who were a little bit older and their parents had told them things when they were checking out instruments.
Okay, so over the weekend on Saturday, Elizabethton held their second annual Betsy Band band contest, and so the reason I bring that up is because I saw so many people who are band directors or staff members of a lot of local bands on Saturday. Most of them either I knew from they were in school at the same time as me here, or they graduated recently. I saw David Chapman, talked to him. He's doing great. He loves his job. And so what we wanted to do today was kind of give you a perspective of what it looks like in our local band programs, what kind of ratios we see there as far as students playing some of these instruments. And so we conducted a survey in October, so last month. The survey was sent out to Tennessee middle schools in East Tennessee, high schools, colleges / community and professional organizations, for instance, ETSU and Symphony of the Mountains, et cetera. And so these people were asked to participate in this survey. For the responses, we had 5 middle schools respond, 4 high schools, and then 4 college, community / professional. We grouped those together just because we're more of the adults, and also because there were so few. So we just clumped those together. So if we look at, this was kind of, I know the numbers are hard to see probably, so I'll kind of just talk through a few of them. We can see that this looks like the graph that I showed you earlier. That was from 2016. It also mirrors some of the research that we found from 1978. Flute is a female instrument. That's what we see. We see that clarinet in middle school is still primarily female, but we do have quite a few more males. You don't really start oboe and bassoon too much in middle school, but there are a couple. Saxophone, primarily male. Trumpet is kind of in the middle, like clarinet. Horn was evened out, but trombone, tuba, and percussion are all 3 very heavily male. So if we're looking at just percentages, I'm only going to talk about a couple because they directly relate to our research and our instruments. So in trombone land, there are 15% who are female in the middle schools around this area. And then there are 33% female percussionists. And so the reason that we wanted to bring this up is because I saw a lot of people that went here that are teaching locally. There are going to be many of you that might stay around and do the same thing. And so getting to know kind of what you're getting into, this presentation is for you to kind of educate that. If we look at the next slide, this is all of the instruments, but into their families. So we have woodwinds, brass, and percussion for the middle schools. We can see that 59.5% of woodwinds were female. But in brassland, only 29.7% were female, and in percussion, 33.6%. And so we can see that this is very much feminine, masculine, masculine. And so it's being reinforced very young, and the cycle is just going to continue. We have to break the will, if you know Game of Thrones. Just don't burn a city down. Looking at high school, we see the same things. Flute. Now we have 0 males. There wasn't one non-binary response, but 46 females, 0 males, 1 non-binary. Clarinet, the difference is much larger now. And so like some of those research studies mentioned, as the students get older, the stereotypes are reinforced even more. So now clarinet was a little less stark of a difference in middle school, but in high school, it's much, much more. Saxophone, same thing. There are far more males. Same in trumpets. Horn, it flipped around. We have a lot more females in hornland in high school. Trombone, though, is we have 26% females in the trombone sections. Tuba, euphonium, also heavily males, and then 25% females in the percussion sections in this area of East Tennessee. And so putting those numbers into their instrument families, we see the same kind of trend, woodwinds, except now it's even more. Woodwinds are feminine, considered feminine, based on who's playing them. Brass, we have 36% are females. And then percussion is down to 25% now. So in middle school, we had more females in the percussion programs, but in high school, it's starting to, the gap is getting larger.
Okay, and then we also did, like Cassidy said, we had colleges, community orchestras, and then professional level. And for this, a lot of these numbers are based off their regular players or roster players. So for a community band, it may be who they normally have play with them. And for these numbers, you can see your main splits. Clarinet, I mean, it's going all the way up. It's mostly female. And then for flute, once again, we have 0 males and 25 female. So a lot of flute players there. And then I found it interesting that when you get to like the horn, here it's perfectly equal. And in our other ones, it was almost equal. And going back to that photo I shared earlier of Chicago Symphony Orchestra, they had 2 horn players, but everything else was male. So I don't know what it is, but I'm realizing that horn is above everything else. Like, they're just ahead of the game, because even on my roster at Symphony of the Mountains, we have split equal. If I'm including our sub list, we have about the same number of female horn players as we do male horn players. So we need to figure out what those horn players are doing, and maybe we can get the trombone players and the tubas on the same path, and then same for percussion as well. Some other things to notice about this graph would be trombone. You have only 6 females, 16 males, and percussion, big gap there, 6 and 21 for the males. Okay, I love how Cassidy did this. She did our graphs, and she did very well with them, because it's so easy to see. Woodwinds, brass, percussion, and the divide with the colors, it just shows woodwinds, mostly female, brass, mostly male, and percussion, mostly male once again. And I also found it interesting that the numbers are so close. You have about 60-70% majority on each one, and then for the smaller section, it's almost always 20-30. So that, I found that very interesting, and I think maybe that means we are making a change. It's just small, because I would say, you look at the older data and you see smaller numbers. You might see 10% female or something. So I think that does show that things are changing. It's just very slow. And where do we go from here with all this information? So we gave you a bunch of information today, and before we get into our next little section, where it kind of gives you all something to do and take from this, I just want to ask 2 questions, and you don't have to answer them right now. It just gives you something to think about. So how can you encourage students to pick any instrument they would like to play? Just go into a room and pick the instrument they like the sound of or the look of best. And then the other question is, how can you support your colleagues, either in your college studio or out playing at a gig? How can you support them no matter what their gender is, their sexuality, culture, race, anything? How can you be supportive to all the people around you? So this section, Cassidy and I kind of came up with together, and it was based off of her future presentations and then also our research. We wanted to give you all something to take away from this, so it isn't like just a bunch of information. So we decided that we wanted to give you all 3 actions that you can put into place, use, and it's really not only just for a music program. You can use this in general. So our 3 actions that we came up with are challenge stereotypes, create equal opportunities, and foster an inclusive environment. So for challenging stereotypes, this one is relatively easy to put into action. Show videos of all types of people playing these instruments. Don't just show the most common one. Don't type in Google, show me a video of a trombonist, because the first one that comes up is probably going to be a male trombonist like Joe Leslie or somebody. So try to dig to find information that's going to be not just the norm. The next step of this one, or just an idea, is to address when a student stereotypes a certain instrument. And this can be difficult, especially for someone like me. I hate any kind of confrontation, even if it's with a student. I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but I hate having to pick at people. I hate that. And for this one, I would say, if a student says, the flute's a girl's instrument, just tell them straight up, that's not okay. There have been times when I've told a student, that's not okay. When I get serious, they're like, okay. And they understand. You don't really have to explain it. But there are some situations where I would say, pull a student aside, explain why that's not okay when necessary.
Before you go on to that's fine. I just want to mention how difficult it was for me to find a picture of a boy playing a flute. I had to go and keep scrolling, just find an image that wasn't someone just playing a recorder or holding the flute just the wrong way, because it was a terrible picture. And so just the fact that some of these resources aren't super accessible, that's something that we can work on. When you're, if at some point, most of you are probably going to teach, whether it's just through private lessons or as a band director. I had no intention of teaching when I graduated, but here I am. That's what I do. So the reality of it is you're likely going to teach us at some point in your life in some capacity. And when you do that, try to find ways that you can make more resources so that they are accessible to people. If you have a male flute student, I'm just using that as an example, make sure that they can find professionals that they can look up to, because they are rare. Just based off finding this picture, it was challenging. And there are some others coming up that it was just not easy. If I Google searched it, it was like I had to go digging to find something that was diverse and not the norm. And so just to kind of add on to that real quick, if you have a student who is challenging you, show them a video of a really good performance of something that they don't think is possible. So if it's a male saying that girls can't drum, show them a video of Evelyn Glennie or other people in the field that could show them up any day. But you have to be able to find those resources yourself so that you can help the students understand, because they don't know what they don't know.
And I would say use your community here too. You have all these people sitting in here who play all these different instruments. Text someone, text Keela and be like, hey, what are some good low brass players or that are female or non-binary? And maybe they'll give you an idea of someone to look out to, reach out to. Okay, the next action is create equal opportunities. And this is the one I kind of touched on earlier. So for this one, when you're doing beginning band placements, just lay out the instruments and let students choose based on what they like the best. You can present them in a neutral environment and also bring in underrepresented players to help with placements. So for example, me and Cassidy, something like that. It doesn't have to be a female percussionist or a female trombone player, but it could be a male flutist or something like that. And then another thing here is solo opportunities regardless of gender. So make sure that you're letting all your students have access to any music you have, solo rep, or if it's like a little quartet they're wanting to put together. Make sure all students have those opportunities. And then lastly, leadership positions, which can be causes of chaos and drama in high school band. Make sure that you do have a good variety of leaders. You don't want all your leaders to be the same type of person with the same personality, with the same ideas. you want to have a variety so that your leadership team can do what they need to.
And then the last point that we have is just to foster an inclusive environment. This is applicable to music educators, but also performers or whatever you're doing. This does not just apply to music. We can start to develop that inclusive environment no matter what we choose to do with our careers. So a few tips. Use gender-neutral language when possible. For example, avoid using language that may be harmful to or target a certain gender. You don't want to say, play that more like a man would, or you play well for a girl, because that is implying that they would play better a certain way, not who they are. Choose learning materials that represent perspectives from multiple gender identities. For example, using or performing and using music for your bands to play, or method books that maybe female identifying composers wrote, or African American composers, etc. Just finding something that a lot of music was written by older white men. Finding something else, because there's music out there that's being written today. And there are resources that you can find that, so that we're not using the same stuff, but we're using something that makes someone else feel like they can relate to them. So I don't have it on here, but it's a link that we have a little later. There's some resources for y'all to help with this. For this inclusive environment and gender-neutral language, there's a website that it's a percussion website, but it's applicable to everybody. It's called the Diversity Alliance. And so if you were to just Google that by Percussive Arts Society, on the right-hand side of the page, they have some PDFs that outline ways to begin thinking about how to use gender-neutral language, some examples, some things to think about. It also lists some ways to promote that inclusivity with your colleagues and making them feel like they're heard no matter what. And so that there are resources out there if you look for them. And so part of this isn't a point that we had, but part of your role in creating this environment is you have to learn more. We have to be aware of what's happening, which is what we're doing today. We're trying to help you become more aware, but you're just going to have to do some digging on your own and looking into these resources. Something that we wanted to mention, not just for the students, but also for the faculty. The ability for students to come to someone who's approachable and can relate to them is sometimes not always there. For us, or for me particularly, I haven't had a female percussion teacher. I love Dr. Geyer and Dr. Ball, but I haven't had a woman that I can talk to about things like that in the field of percussion. And so for some of you, if you have a male studio teacher or a female and you're a male, whatever, finding that person that you could reach out to talk about things. And so something that faculty members can do, or music teachers, whenever you all have jobs, in your syllabus, you could add a faculty member who would be willing to talk to your students if they have questions and want to reach out. That way they have a safe person to go to. Because they might prefer someone who is the same gender, race, ethnicity, etc. And if they only see that one person every day, if they only see that one band teacher, and they don't know that other people are there to help them, then they're just going to feel alone. So that's something kind of relatable to hopefully everybody in the room. But those were our 3 kind of actions.
Okay. So we want to do just like, we don't really have many closing remarks, but if anyone has questions about research, about something today, or you just want to say, hey, this is a good idea for putting these actions into place, we want to kind of open up the room for that because we've still got a little bit of time left. Yeah. So from what I've seen, both of my mentors when I did student teaching were males. And from what I saw, it was interesting. I would go into the classroom and the students, they acted different towards me. It's weird to see, but I think it's definitely about the way you present yourself, if you're approachable, because it was funny with both of my mentors, the kids would go hug them and stuff, but there were a few kids that come and hug me. And it was almost like a motherly type thing, even though I'm definitely not their mom, but where I'm a female, they felt like they could come and hug me and just and some of them didn't have that at home. So I would say the way that you act towards them, the way that you move, the way that you present yourself, the way you converse with them even. When they come in the room, hey, how are you doing? Like, what's been up this weekend? What are you interested in right now? Having little conversations with them, that helps a lot from what I've seen with my mentors. So I would suggest just building those relationships with them, caring about them, and they will pick up on that. And if you're comfortable being around them, they are going to be comfortable being around you. And sometimes a little too much. They'll try to come hug you and get all over you like you're their parents, but you do have to kind of put up those boundaries sometimes. You're welcome.
In the back. Yeah.
And so I really want to change that narrative and do more research about that. I've just never been able to know how to start that. Is there like a way that you started doing research or anything?
Yeah. So for me, my research started in Dr. Dedman's class. I took that class very seriously, research methods. I don't know if it's still called that or Music History 1. Yeah. So I have always been just me. I'm an academic, so even throughout high school and just my other college classes, I was quote unquote good at looking things up and reading because I like to read. But I learned about some resources that we have at ETSU, like our library, interlibrary loans, and just ways that we can find things. And so the biggest advice that I can give is, one, look it up. Just start researching. Find some academic websites or ETSU's library to start doing your own research. If you were there are chances that someone has researched a similar topic or maybe started that research or maybe not, and maybe that's where you come in. So if you were to start, this is kind of what Em mentioned, you don't have to write a thesis because you have to. You don't have to do research because you're told to. That can be a personal endeavor that you do because you want to see something change. And so just finding what's out there via some of these resources you have. Dr. Dedman is a wonderful resource, and she can help you with figuring out how to get started. I don't know if you've had any of those classes. Yeah. Yeah, they're great. I learned a lot there, but one of the biggest takeaways was how to find things. And so that's what I would do. I would start research, even if it's just starting with a Google search, see what you can find, and then just go down a rabbit hole. Another thing that maybe you could do is write your own opera that doesn't have that kind of ending. Yeah. So start something new yourself. Yes. Do you want to start with this?
I'll start with it. I think a lot of it can start at that first band meeting. I know mine was with parents. So maybe when you're planning, if you're going to be a teacher, at a school, at a smaller school or even a bigger school, if you can plan to have a meeting with parents, maybe have your parents come in with your students and have someone come in or you yourself speak on it and explain that in the past, parents have had a lot of influence on their children's choice, but you would like that to not be the case. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. So I think we are visual creatures, and so just seeing things. So I think the band meeting is great because I think most programs have that initial band meeting. Sometimes it's just parents, sometimes it's with the students. But if future educators had a way to either have a PowerPoint that talks about each instrument, just to give the parents an understanding and the students an understanding of what each one is. But in that PowerPoint, or if these were posters or that they hang around the band room, whatever, having everything shown, having a variety, having it be diverse. So I know when I was in high school, we had 2 percussion posters hanging up in the room. One was a male performer and one was a female. And so I saw that every day. I think that is ingrained in my mind. But so I saw that it was cool to be a female percussionist. But when I was in middle school, we didn't have that. We just had blue lockers, and it was very boring to look at. And the boys would go and try to shove their sticks in the ceiling, and we just didn't have that kind of environment. So starting it at that meeting, even if it was an email to parents with some resources that they can check out what options are available for their students, what the potential for each one of those is, and just trying to challenge the stereotypes, like one of the action points is challenging those from day one and showing both or all 3 or, et cetera. Just showing that it's not boys on all the brass instruments and females on all the woodwinds. And starting that, because the parents are going to pick up on that, and they're also going to see, and this takes years, this is years of change, but you all start this, but they're also going to see, especially if they have older students in the band, or they're going to see the high school bands perform. And so really getting things out in the public via email, that initial meeting, Facebook, et cetera, just social media. Question back here first. Yeah, I know you know my research. I don't know if you know my research. I think so. Yes. My research looked into specifically the diversity of the composers who have worked programs in college and university band concerts over the last 20-ish years. I was wondering, because you both have different experiences, how that looks right now on a professional, with Symphony of the Mountains, and on the high school level. Where are we in terms of how are we programming? How diverse is that?
You speak on high school, I'll speak on symphony.
Yeah. And I can also speak on ETSU's percussion program. Yeah. As far as the realm of percussion goes, I know that some of our leading quartets and professional organizations are being very open about how they're programming. There's a group called Third Coast Percussion, and I believe they have it on their actual website, how their program lines up, what the percentages are of women identifying, African Americans, et cetera, and what they're programming. They're trying to make a conscious effort, but they're being very open about it so that they're held accountable. I know for our PASIC program, Dr. Ball and Dr. Geiger sat down and they tried to make a very diverse program. And so I think in percussion land, I think we're trying to make a huge stride toward that equality as far as what we program. We've had a movement in the last couple of years toward that. We have resources for, there are actually these mass spreadsheets that we have for Black composers and all of the music, whether it's solos, and it's categorized by solos, orchestral rep, concert rep, different chamber percussion ensembles. And so that's available if anyone's interested in that. You're welcome to email us. But we also have one for females, and so it has everything's listed. And so we're just creating these databases to where it's much more accessible and we don't have to go searching as hard for it. From a high school standpoint, I don't think, Michael and I, we don't program the wind ensemble music, but I'm not sure as far as, we only have our one school. And so as far as others in the area, I think it'd be a little biased. Yeah, Michael. Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is just for the high school and middle school levels, resources financially on getting new music, because a lot of them have built up these libraries and then they just put music on rotations. And so I think resources, and then they just don't know about it. So I don't know how much has changed because I don't have any of that data, but I know in Yay!
That's good.
Yeah, I'll just say that in our field, we've been making an effort toward that. Em?
Yeah, I'll be really quick with mine. So Symphony of the Mountains, I will say we are moving forward so much. It's kind of shocking me at some points. We have a concert coming up in February for Black History Month, and pretty much everything programmed is like it's so diverse, I can't even explain. Like we have about everything you could cover in that concert. And I know our director even wanted to do a piece, this is kind of related. She wanted to do a piece kind of in memory of the people who have died in Gaza. I think I'm saying that right. And that's something that I was like, wow. You know, not everyone would think of other people like that. So I think things are changing in this area. We're programming very diverse and new music. No, it makes sense. So I, for the past several years, I actually do help with some middle school placements. And we do the same thing. You test the mouthpiece, what can they make a sound on, et cetera. The thing that you find in a case like maybe yours is if you were good at clarinet, what are your friends doing? Are they going to be playing clarinet too? And so that's what, like a lot of girls, in fact, Michael just had a student who has been taking percussion lessons for a while now, but her friends were doing flute, and so she just went to flute. And so it's kind of that social aspect too. But one thing that I've found is where I am a female and I've been doing these placements for a little while now, are that some of the girls that would come in and try out for percussion, their friends were doing woodwinds, but they saw that I was able to do it, thought it was cool, and they've actually stuck with it. And so one of them, for example, is a section leader at a high school around here. And so she stuck with it, and her mom was so thankful that I had been there, because otherwise, if it had been someone else doing the placement, she might have just gone with her friends, because she didn't see she wouldn't have seen that was possible. And so just getting people to come in and help you with those placements that are not the norm, or having a few people, like if you had, for example, just Michael and me going and placing percussionists, then you see that
that is kind of neutral and you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, I think also I wanted to add to that. When you're doing those placements, I know some schools, they're like, the band director will say, try 3 instruments and then pick one, or it's different ways per the school you're at. And I'm sure Cassidy's experienced that too. But I would encourage your students, try everything. It's not going to hurt anything. Because I even know there were students when I've done placements and they're like, I don't want to try tuba or whatever it is. So I would encourage them, try everything because it's not going to hurt you.
I think you would find that a lot of flute music is probably written by males. Well, so I would say you can absolutely show them any of the best ones, right? Because we're going for sound and what they want to get better. But going out of your way to find some males too, so that they're not just seeing all of the females. Does that make sense? So don't go for the easy stuff, like actually do some digging and find something that they can relate to a little bit more.
And showing them that's not going to hurt anything. Because like Cassidy said, we want to show them the best. So if the best few just happen to be females, that's fine. But make sure there are some male players in there, because there are great flute players who are male as well. But if you were saying like for that specific piece, you couldn't find a male playing that piece, yeah, that's fine. Because we have to work with what we've got.
Yeah, and
we'll
if it's
try our best,
If it's as far as like the piece being written by one or the other, find a few. Find one that's written by a male. Find one that's written by a non-binary. Find one that's written by a female, if you can, and then give them options. Be like, you can choose which one you like the best. I forgot your name. Piano. Oh, different one. Okay. I don't the black shirt, but I'll get to you in a second. Jeremy? Okay. I saw you play and you're awesome. My initial thought is, I think students are like, I'm going to play what my friend is playing because then I'll get to hang out with them a lot. If you create opportunities for them to hang out or play duets with other instruments so that they can play with their friends, and it's okay to be on a different instrument because now they can do duets in other settings, then they get that quality social time while also pursuing an instrument that they can be very successful at. Does that kind of make sense? That's kind of my initial thought, Em.
Yeah, and I think also encouraging sections to do things together. So then maybe they will create friends, or not create, but they will have more friends in their section. Because I know for me personally, I always became friends with whoever was in my section. So I wasn't worried about being with my friends because I was like, oh, these are my other friends. Like, these are my friends too. So maybe just creating opportunities for them to hang out in general, even if it could be a quartet or it could be some event that they're going to just for fun.
Just making it clear that they don't have to do the same thing that their friend's doing. Because sometimes they might think they'll feel that pressure, well, I need to be with my friend. And so just making them know that, yeah, it's okay to not be beside them the whole time for the whole class period because you're going to have these opportunities to still be with them. The other one, yeah. What's your name?
I'm James.
Oh, James. Okay, hi, James.
Hi. I had a question, or I was curious about if you had found during your research anything in terms of gender bias
So from our research, the only thing that related to piano, really, as far as numbers, was just some initial data or data and writings that we found that, and I meant to mention this earlier, but Beth McLeod in her research, she stated that piano was one of the instruments that women were pushed toward because they could have a nice posture and it didn't touch their face. Aside from that, we focused on mostly the band setting, and we don't have like pianists in that. So unfortunately, no.
That would be interesting, though, because where it started out as such a push for females to play it, like piano and harp, they were like, we want you to play that if you're female. So that would be interesting to see today. You know, is it more female or male, or is it split now? That would be very interesting.
It's like if I think of famous pianists, I can think of like a lot of famous female pianists, but also a lot of famous male pianists. So it's like I feel like it would be a boring situation where it's like kind of split down the middle or very close. But
I think because piano is such an older instrument and has a lot of history in Europe, and it has that history, whereas like percussion does not have that history. We're still very young. Same with the saxophone. Piano has that rich background, and it's been pretty prominent in a bunch of different musical settings. So it has it's developed that kind of equality, but we don't have the numbers to back that.
Well, thank you all for like all the great questions. That was awesome. And thank you to the music department and Dr. Stevens for having us. And it was an honor to be here with Cassidy too and talk more about our research. So I hope you all have a great day.
I'll send you Emin and Cassidy's information. I had absolutely nothing to do with your education, but I've never been so proud to be chair of this department. So I hope that you can all and the person who did have a lot to do with this is Dr. Dedman. But I hope that you all are inspired to make some changes. And I think the most important thing you said today was you can't just talk about it. You have to actually do something. So those of you who want to be music educators, I would love to have them back in 10 years and these numbers be different. So thank you again for this really important presentation. They're both around. And as a conductor, I will say this. M works for a female conductor. Conductors, this is probably even worse. As far as, especially in the orchestral and band world, female conductors is like less than 10%. So I have mad respect for Cornelia at Symphony of the Mountains. I encourage you to go watch that. And if you ever want to be a conductor, she was here last year for those who were there, but it's really bad in gender bias with conducting. But go check out Symphony of the Mountains. Thanks again.